Good morning and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2025. We've received apologies this morning from Ross Greer, and can I welcome Ros McCall, who's joining us for this meeting. The first item on our agenda is consideration of subordinate legislation, the Qualifications Scotland Appointment of Initial Members Regulations 2025, SSI 2025-278. This instrument is being considered under the negative procedure. Do members have any comments to make about this instrument? Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you. Good morning, Convener. Just to say congratulations to the members who have been appointed to the board, and I wondered if the committee may like to ask the government what sort of training and support those members have had, particularly given that they've transferred from the SQA to Qualifications Scotland, and there is a high expectation on Qualifications Scotland to be a different organisation to that went before it. And so I wondered if we could ask the government to give us some reassurance about the information that those board members have been given in order to be able to deliver that aim.
Thanks, Convener. Just as a comment, I mean, I see there has been a quality impacts assessment, but I also noticed that there are 5 men and 2 women, which I think is not ideal. Anyway.
Okay, do we agree to write to the government on those 2 points that have been highlighted by members? That's agreed. Is the committee agreed that it does not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument? That is agreed. The next item of business is the final evidence session on the Children, Care Experience and Services Planning Scotland Bill. Can I welcome Natalie Dorn-Innes, Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise, and her officials, Gavin Henderson, Deputy Director Keeping the Promise, Iona Colvin, Chief Social Work Advisor, Tom McNamara, Head of Youth Justice and Children's Hearings, and Brian McCaffrey, Lawyer, Scottish Government Legal Directorate. Thank you all for joining us today. Given the likely length of this session, we've advised the Minister and members that we'll likely take a break in about 90 minutes halfway through this session, but we will now begin with an opening statement from the Minister, and over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Convener. It's a personal honour for me to bring forward this legislation. The provisions set out in this bill represent a significant step forward in our commitment to keep the promise and ensure that all children and young people in Scotland can grow up loved, safe and respected. The bill builds upon progress already being made nationally and locally. There are now fewer children and young people who are looked after in Scotland. There are no young people under 18 being admitted to young offenders institutes, and more people with care experience are going on to positive destinations 9 months after leaving school. But we all know that the journey that we are on has still some way to go. The pace of change has to be increased, and in more areas and on more issues. The promise has to become a reality in care experienced people's lives, and this bill seeks to support that ambition. It makes changes to a wide range of policy areas, including expanding eligibility for aftercare, improving the language of care, establishing a national register of foster carers, tackling excessive profit in the care system, providing statutory guidance to promote understanding and expanding eligibility for the right to advocacy. This last measure is particularly important because it will empower children and young people and ensure that their opinions are central in decision-making in their own lives. It also ensures that the voice of care-experienced children and young people is supported and heard throughout the system. I was at an event hosted by Our Hearings, Our Voice, which was all about celebrating and listening to care-experienced voices. And at that event, young people spoke about some of the ways that they would like to see hearings change. They're carrying out some great work of their own, but some of what was discussed, I think, speaks directly to the bill, which also includes provisions to help strengthen the children's hearing system and to strengthen the relationship between children and adult services, which are key to delivering holistic family support. Now, this bill is not the sum total of our work to keep the promise, and nor should it be. There are practical changes being made that do not require legislative reform, and there are others, such as Chapter 3 on children's hearings, which are part of a wider and broader project to redesign children's hearings. I am, however, aware that there are a wide range of views on whether improvements and additions can be made to this bill. I want to put on record my appreciation to everyone who has responded to and engaged with the development of the bill's provisions, from the original consultation through to providing and giving evidence to Stage 1, as well as everybody that I've met with along the way. I'm also grateful to committee members and to party spokespeople for engaging with me at stage 1, and I hope that cooperation continues throughout this bill's progress in Parliament. I want to be very clear that I am listening, and I am happy to take the committee's questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. You described it as a personal honour for you to take forward this bill, and we're led to believe this is an important piece of legislation for the Scottish Government. Why then has there been so much criticism from a broad range of witnesses that your engagement and consultation in advance of the bill has been so poor?
I don't believe there has been a lack of engagement. I think that there has been extensive engagement on my behalf and on behalf of my officials. Of course, the bill has been informed by the Independent Care Review, which reflected the voices of over 5,500 care-experienced children, adults and families. We undertook 4 public consultations. There has been a range of work ongoing with different organisations. I've engaged with Sheriff Mackey around his report on the children's hearing system. There has been a range of, most importantly, I have met on a very regular basis with children and young people to determine what it is that are their priorities. So while I appreciate that there has been some criticism around the engagement, I don't necessarily know if that is criticism around engagement leading up to the bill, and think it's perhaps more a lack of engagement around the specific provisions in the bill. And of course, I have the duty to respect Parliament. I'm bound by the Ministerial Code. But I can assure the committee that both leading up to the introduction of the bill and following the introduction of the bill, I have engaged widely. Myself and my officials have engaged widely, and I will continue to do so.
Well, I'll go through many, many examples that explains to us as a committee that that's just not true. What I'm going to give you is written evidence submitted to the committee, oral evidence that we heard. Did you follow all of that? And did you have any concerns at the time when people were saying this about you and your officials?
Yeah, I did hear the concerns around engagement, but what Mr. Ross says that what I've said isn't true, but I can assure him, what I've just highlighted in terms of who I've engaged with, who my officials have engaged with is very, very true.
What I'm saying, Minister, is I'm going to start reading a massive list of different organisations that have been highly critical. Organisations I expected, as an opposition spokesperson or an opposition member, to be generally supportive of the bill, and some of them were, but they were at pains to tell us how badly you and your officials had consulted with them prior to the introduction of this important piece of legislation. I don't understand if something is such a big personal honour for you that you can now just ignore what they've said. And before I read them out, just explain to me why you mentioned the Ministerial Code. What were you getting at there?
Well, obviously, as I said, I think there was some frustration that the draft bill or the specific detail on the scope and exactly what was to be included in the bill was not shared with key stakeholders ahead of being introduced to Parliament. But as the committee is aware, that is in line with parliamentary protocol and the Ministerial Code in relation to the introduction of legislation. But as I've been very clear, prior to the introduction and following introduction, I've been very keen to engage as widely as possible, and that includes with these committee members.
I'm lost now. How can you say the Ministerial Code prevents you from doing something before it's presented to Parliament, but in the same answer also say that you engaged widely before it was introduced to Parliament?
Because I engaged widely around, what it is that people's priorities are for the promise, what people's priorities were for the bill. I couldn't engage directly around the specific provisions in the bill. That would be to disrespect this committee and essentially disrespect Parliament. So I had to wait until the bill was introduced to be able to speak with stakeholders and members about those very specific provisions. Of course, though, there was a level of understanding of what would be included in the bill, given the 4 public consultations were underway, and I was very clear, leading up to introduction of the bill, that there would be provisions in the bill very likely relating to those consultations, hence the need to consult in the first place.
Let's go through some of the criticisms. Sheriff Mackey, who you mentioned yourself, said in his written submission, the lack of consultation during the preparation of the consultation document and then the drafting of the bill has meant a lack of engagement with or input drawing on the experience of the sector or those with lived experience of children's hearings. How do you respond to that?
I'm sorry that Sheriff Mackey felt that way when he spoke to the committee. I've had very good engagement with Sheriff Mackey throughout the process of the bill. I have worked closely with him in relation to the findings from his report and how we could possibly implement them going forward. I think, I'm sure we'll get back onto the children's hearing redesign, but, we've really tried to keep the ethos of that report in the provisions as much as possible. But as I say, I don't know the specific number of times, but I do know that Sheriff Mackey engaged frequently with both myself and my officials leading up to the introduction of the bill. Again, however, I could not go through specific provisions and scope of the bill with Sheriff Mackey.
COSLA, the umbrella organisation for our local authorities. We've got the Verity House Agreement that is supposed to improve the working relationships between the government, ministers and local government. Their submission said the lack of meaningful engagement and partnership working with key stakeholders during the development of the bill is a significant concern. How do you respond to COSLA?
Again, I have evidence of where my officials have...
So why are COSLA at pains to tell us how bad it's been with this bill and with you and your officials?
Well,
why are COSLA saying that?
I will ensure to discuss this with COSLA and to discuss this.
Minister, we've had this evidence. You said you followed our evidence. If I was in your shoes, I'd have thought this is clearly going to be an area I'm going to be challenged on. You can't really come here and say, well, you'll now look into it going forward. I'd really like to know now why your engagement in the eyes of COSLA has been so poor. On a bill, I'd expect them to be working hand in glove with you.
So, Convener, what I would say is I'm not saying that I will now look into this. I heard the representations that were made by COSLA, and I will bring my official in to speak to some of the engagement that has been undertaken with COSLA in the lead up to this bill, because, as I said, I don't know. That's why I would like to discuss it further with them. I'm not sure if this is in relation to specific provisions or specific areas, because in looking at, for example, advocacy, I know that my officials engaged with COSLA around this point. I have evidence of this. So, again, I would really like to discuss this further with either COSLA or the Children and Young People spokesperson to understand exactly what they're referring to.
So when it was in their written submissions, so when you saw that in the written submission, why didn't you reach out to them then? It was months ago.
I have a range of people that I have to discuss the aspects of the bill with. I do discuss this on a fairly regular basis with the...
but you're coming to committee today saying you're not sure where their concerns stem from, but these concerns have been written in black and white for months. Why are you now saying you'll go away and speak to them when you and your officials have seen this in the written submission on this bill?
I think it's a case of one side says one thing and one side says another.
So
As I say, I've been very clear that I know that there has been engagement with COSLA around a number of aspects of this bill. So I think further discussion is required if there's a point of contention there, and that is what I intend to do.
There's clearly a point of contention. I just don't know why we're at this late stage and you've not tried to drill down into that.
I think I've been wanting to get a fair idea of the the committee evidence and what has came through the committee evidence. I now do have a lengthy a period of engagement where I am engaging with a range of different stakeholders. COSLA will of course be included in that. COSLA are working in the background with my officials as we speak in terms of a range of different provisions on the bill, different requirements of data in relation to specific aspects of the bill. So I'm confident that that work is underway and ongoing. As I say, following on from COSLA's evidence sessions, then I'm more than happy, if that point of contention is still there, to discuss that further. But perhaps Gavin could allude to...
I'll come to officials in a moment, but we don't have that luxury. As I said when I introduced you and your officials, this is our final evidence session. We're going to be writing a report after today, and I'm now not sure where you sit on this. You say you've heard these criticisms. We've had multiple criticisms of the lack of engagement. I'm going to come to them more in a moment. And what we get from you as the Minister is you're now going to go away and look into that. We can't then include that in our report because today's the last opportunity we have to take evidence. Can I also...
Convener, sorry, if I could. You're talking about what can be included in the report. I've given you factual information about the engagement that has taken place, and I'm offering to bring my official in to clarify that further or to provide more information in relation to what has gone on
but
around
you're also
engagement.
Saying you're going to speak to COSLA after this meeting to understand where their concern stems from.
Well, you
the
said
concern that they noted months ago.
So you said that the letter had been sent months ago, which is absolutely right. But as I've said, there has been a period of engagement ongoing behind the scenes with officials in relation to different aspects of the bill, working directly with COSLA. So, in relation to hearing this again at the evidence session, I think that there hasn't been much time in that respect to arrange a meeting and go ahead with COSLA. That is something that I class as a priority. I imagine I'll be meeting more than once with COSLA around this bill. So it's not that I'm throwing it into the long grass or anything. I am just I'm laying out factually the engagement that has taken place between both myself and my officials. I appreciate there are still concerns outstanding, and I will discuss that further. And I'm more than happy to write a letter to the committee if the committee would like to understand that once I've had those further discussions.
I'll come to Mr Henderson because I want to read out some more quotes and then he might want to speak about them all. An area I'm really surprised that there was such strong criticism was from the Promise Scotland. An about their concerns.
Sorry, I was just agreeing.
Okay. So in their written submission from months ago, they said the process to develop this bill, it has been noted that there has been an absence of meaningful engagement during the development of the bill. And then almost 2 months ago, Fraser McKinlay, in his oral evidence, these are all quotes from him, engagement has been frustrating. I found that everyone who had been involved and had experience of legislation in previous years was struck by how locked down this bill was. We had no indications of the details of the bill until it was published on the 18th of June. The bill landed quite cold. These are not the comments of someone that has been heavily engaged with the development of the bill. There was a real sense of frustration from the Promise Scotland and Fraser McKinlay when they were in front of this committee that you hadn't tapped into their expertise and knowledge. How do you respond to that?
I find that surprising to on a lot of levels, because I meet with the Promise Scotland on a regular basis. I engaged with them frequently. Again, I would just emphasise not on the specific provisions in the bill, because that would be that would not be the correct process. And again, I would come back to the comments that I made earlier around there are areas of the bill that it was very clear were likely, or there are areas that were very clear they would likely be in the bill given the host of public consultation around them. I don't really have anything further to add other than, I'm disappointed that feeling of lack of engagement is there, but I can assure the committee that, again, both I and my officials continue to engage directly with the Promise. I'm just not sure if this is relating to... Well, in fact, you said it yourself, Mr Ross, that this is really... The Promise said that they had no idea what was included in the bill, but that is a parliamentary procedure that I have to follow.
You're saying you're surprised and disappointed. Some of that's in the written submission, some of that's in their oral evidence on the 10th of September. What did you do when you heard that? Did you pick up the phone to Fraser McKinlay? Did your officials reach out to them about their concerns?
My officials reached out to them, and I have a meeting coming up with...
In response to their concerns about the lack of consultation on the bill?
If I could bring...
Yep. So it is in response to the concerns and the lack of consultation?
Those concerns were directly discussed, yes.
Okay. The last one before Mr Henderson comes in, Celsius. I was going to go to Social Work Scotland. This is a quote from John Traynor when he was at committee. The government did not do sufficient engagement with a range of stakeholders during the development of the bill. This is disappointing. The bill could have been strengthened had the government engaged across the professional bodies that work to support Scotland's children, young people and care-experienced adults. It would have been vastly improved if that had happened. What do you make of that comment at this committee on the 8th of October from Social Work Scotland?
I think I would reiterate my comments that I've made already. I was disappointed to hear and read the response from Social Work Scotland because, again, I know that my officials engage frequently. In fact, I did meet with Social Work Scotland last week. I wanted to directly discuss the concerns that they had.
Okay, so what did they say to you then about that?
But again, they reinforced the lack of engagement, but at the same time, they also advised that they are on the phone to my officials on almost an hourly or daily basis. So I think there's conflicting stories there in terms of, you know, the level of engagement with myself and my officials. However, very much respect Social Work Scotland, very much want to work with them on strengthening the bill going forward. And that's what I said last week in my meeting with them, that if there are areas where they feel that the bill could be strengthened, that's essentially what I've said to everyone that I've met with around this, that I am very open to listening, and I believe that this is the appropriate point where we do need to take that feedback and we do need to consider that going ahead of stage 2.
So given the respect you have for Social Work Scotland, do you agree with them that the bill would have been vastly improved if you had consulted better and more prior to the introduction of this bill?
I think it comes back to the point, Mr Ross, that again that would be breaking parliamentary protocol if I was to go into the specific provisions.
I'm not asking you to go into the specifics, but do you agree with them that the bill could have been vastly improved had the consultation been better?
No, I don't necessarily agree with that point.
Okay. Mr Henderson, is there anything you want to add?
I think the Minister's...
You don't need to press your button.
Sorry. I think the Minister's covered the point very clearly.
Sorry, you've switched off your mic, so we'll need to switch. No, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I think the Minister's covered the point quite comprehensively. Just on a few specifics, I know, Mr Ross, you were given evidence from COSLA about engagement on advocacy, for example. There has been regular engagement, including in advance of the bill, on to try and get data to inform the financial memorandum. COSLA felt unable to provide information on that in February and March this year. On the Promise Scotland, the Minister met regularly with Fraser McKinley and Fiona Duncan in advance of the bill, including at a session we were both at the Promise's office, where we talked about the topics which had been consulted on and the likely areas for inclusion, but the Minister was clear that as a result of parliamentary protocol she was unable to go through the detail, and I understand that's a similar conversation the Minister had with Sheriff Mackey. On Social Work Scotland, I followed the evidence there as well. It's disappointing to hear that because in last week's discussion with Social Work Scotland they made clear that they are having very, very regular discussion with policy officials in the Scottish Government and have throughout this process. And of course all of these organisations were part of the formal consultation process as we consulted on four consultations last year to inform the content of the bill. And the message was very clearly given out that these were the areas that the government was primarily looking at for inclusion in legislation, of course keeping the right side of the parliamentary rules which we're subject to.
I mean, you mentioned COSLA and the costings. They said in their written submission the costings are based on information that was provided for a different legislative change some time ago and is therefore out of date and taken out of context. There has been no engagement with COSLA or Social Work Scotland in relation to this bill to ensure that appropriate figures have been used.
So I've got emails in front of me that we can share with the committee.
Why are COSLA telling us this?
You'd have to ask them.
I'm going to be very careful with the words I choose here. Have they misled Parliament by telling us that?
It's not for me to say that.
Are you saying what I've read out there is incorrect?
I'm saying we have got information about the engagement on, for example, advocacy and financial information from February and March this year. I'm not trying to accuse anyone of anything.
But that's in their written submission that you and the Minister have read. And that didn't raise alarm bells when you read that?
Obviously, these are discussions that we've subsequently had with COSLA.
Minister, did it raise alarm bells for you?
Absolutely, considering that I know the engagement that has taken place.
No, not whether there was enough engagement or not, but COSLA saying that the costings are based on information that's provided for a different legislative change some time ago and is therefore out of date and taken out of context.
So to be clear, I believe that's around the costings around aftercare, and that's something that I am very understand. So I appreciate the concerns that have been raised around that. I'm sorry, I would probably need to refer to my officials about the engagement that has taken place in relation to that specific aspect. However, Gavin is referring to the engagement that has taken place around advocacy, and there has, a direct request to COSLA for further information to work with COSLA around that. So I guess that maybe feeds into the complexity around this. There are various different aspects of this bill that will require engagement from different teams, I would imagine, within the Scottish Government officials. And there may be concerns around specific aspects or specific areas. As I said, I'm more than willing to, discuss these areas with COSLA or whoever it may be. But I am very clear that we have, as I've said, there is evidence there that there have been attempts made to engage and, gather data from COSLA.
Paul McLennan wants to come in on this point.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to build on the engagement part, because I think the really important part of this is bringing it back to why we're really doing this, and that's on engagement with children and young people. So I don't know if you can say just a little bit about engagement with the children and young people. I joined the committee and the most, I suppose, humbling part of this was listening in our session with the kids. In terms of this, we met with 40-odd kids who your care experience and so on, and that was the most humbling experience. So I just wanted to build on and ask you what the engagement was and your officials' engagement was with children and young people, and bring it back to who is the most important part of this.
Thank you, Mr McLennan. I think that is very important. We do have to remember what children, young people, and equally what care experienced adults are saying about the system and about the changes and priorities that they would like to see. I couldn't rhyme off all the engagement that I've had with children and young people. Most recently, I've met with the Hearings Experts by Experience and the OHOV group that I mentioned at the beginning. I engage regularly with children and young people. I'd be more than happy to send the committee a record of the different ways that I have done so. And absolutely, I think we need to be clear that that is the commitment. What I would say, I actually heard some of the feedback from the committee meeting with children and young people, which I think was really positive. And I know that they were very positive about aspects of the bill. And I think, we need to remember why we're doing this. We're doing this to change the lives of children and young people who are growing up in care. And the feedback that I've had from young people so far, both officially and anecdotally, has been very positive.
Thanks, Convener.
Willie Rennie.
Some concern around about the eligibility, the funding, the kind of cliff edge. Can you just talk around some of those issues that have been raised before and how you would address those concerns around about aftercare?
So you mentioned, sorry, Mr Rennie, funding.
So funding, whether it's been costed appropriately, whether there's a cliff edge, the fact that we'll stop at a certain age, the eligibility. Is it reaching far enough into different types of care experienced people? So those are the issues that I'd quite like to
in relation to the funding, I think I've already picked that up. I know there has been concerns raised around aspects of funding, and I'll continue to discuss that with COSLA. So that's something that I'll be progressing. Essentially, aftercare, widening eligibility to aftercare so that more young people with care experience and need will be provided with person-centred support that will enable more positive transitions to adulthood and that will help them thrive. I think this is a really positive measure. You refer to eligibility, but if anything, I think this expands the pool. We know that there are instances where children and young people's care placement has broken down. They may have been returned home. That would mean that they would not be eligible for aftercare. The bill provisions change this. And I think that is really impactful when you think about the experiences that a child or young person may have in their younger years that, may not be seen to impact them, but in later life could. So I think this is a really, really positive move in terms of opening up those support systems for more children and young people who have experienced care. Of course, local authorities have the responsibility and ability to provide further support if there are. So I don't know if Mr Rennie wants to get into specific examples around eligibility or that cliff edge. But I would, if there are instances where a young person was going to experience that cliff edge, I believe that local authorities do have that responsibility to look into the situation that that young person may be in and to provide support where that is appropriate.
So, was there consultation with North Yorkshire Council?
I'm sorry, Mr Rennie, I don't have that information to hand. I would have to. No.
Mr Henderson,
Sorry,
you actually
apologies.
switch yourself off when you do that.
My apologies, can you hear me? No, I don't know.
It's just they're hailed as an exemplar in the United Kingdom for their right to return and also their always here policy. And their always here policy, very simply put, is around about that aftercare and that support. And there is no cliff edge. You can get it throughout your life. You can get support in terms of housing, in terms of employment, the whole range of services you can get. But also, there is in specific circumstances a right to return to care. Now, Duncan Dunlop, who was one, he gave evidence to the committee, specifically stated that North Yorkshire was an example that we should be following. So I'm surprised that that wasn't at least picked up from him, or even before that, because if a simple search, you can find that North Yorkshire is hailed as a great exemplar. So why are we not drawing on experiences from south of the border?
That's certainly something that I'm more than happy to look into further. I would kind of reinforce what I've already said. Local authorities already do or have the ability to provide aftercare beyond the age of 26. They would be best placed to understand the specific needs of a child or young person or a young adult and decide if that is something that would be required. In terms of right to return, I think there are complexities around that, but our aftercare provisions and our policy around continuing care does allow for young people to return to a local authority for that support where it is required. So, I don't know if Mr Rennie has very specific examples of cliff edge, but I do appreciate what Mr Rennie brings to me in terms of the specific example, and I'm more than happy to go away and look into what it is that is running so successfully in West Yorkshire, I believe it was he mentioned.
So the bill provisions don't extend the right to receive support to those leaving care prior to the age of 16. Why is that?
Sorry?
So the bill provisions do not extend the right to receive support to those leaving care prior to 16. Why is that?
So this allows...
Why the bill provisions do not extend the right to receive support to those leaving care prior to 16. Is that...
So it's based on a needs assessment, but it would allow for local authorities to provide...
But does it specify that that has to be provided? I mean, local authorities can do a lot of things, can't they? They've got the right to do all sorts of things. But are they compelled to do so?
Well, if the needs assessment found that a child or young person was in need of it, they would be required to get it.
So this is wrong. So it is available to all those leaving care prior to the age of 16?
If it is deemed that it is necessary and appropriate, yes. Obviously, not all under 16s would require that, but absolutely, if that needs assessment takes place and it is deemed that it is appropriate for that young person to receive further care, then they would get that.
Because some of our witnesses expressed concern in this area that there was not clarity about these definitions.
Okay.
That eligibility was not clear. For instance, informal kinship arrangements, was the provision available for them? Those kind of things, there's a lack of clarity with all of this. It's very vague, and that's why they've raised concerns.
So I think, again, so in terms of the kind of general point, if, I know there are concerns around that, and I'm more than happy to look into if there's any way that I can make that clearer. In relation to the point that Mr Rennie raises around kinship, I'm very aware that there are a number of complexities around kinship and notably informal kinship care. Again, I would put that down to the local authority. You know, it's very likely that the local authority would have already came into contact with the child, so will be aware of that child's circumstances, that child's needs, and will be able to assess that adequately. But I take the point and more than happy to look if there's ways to make that clearer.
Housing. Our witnesses express concern that the problems that many care experienced people experience around about homelessness won't be addressed by these provisions. Can you reassure me that they will?
Well, there's a statutory duty already placed on local authorities through regulations to provide or support those eligible for aftercare with suitable accommodation. Of course, this should be again assessed on the needs of the young person. But of course, underpinning this approach is the government's guidance on aftercare, corporate parenting, social housing allocations and homelessness code, which together set out the need for a prioritised and tailored response to ensuring that young people move on from care. Now, there is work ongoing around this. We are seeking to further improve the experiences of young people's care experience, finding appropriate housing, and our focus is on progressing the recommendations of the Improving Care Levers Housing Pathways report. This prevention and strategy group is currently being set up. That's led by Kate Polson, CEO of the Rock Trust, Mr Rennie will be aware of. I will also be meeting with the Cabinet Secretary for Housing soon to discuss this work, and I am aware that the Cabinet Secretary for Housing will be coming to the Cabinet Subcommittee to provide an update on the priorities for improving care experience people's experiences in assessing housing, so they're in accessing housing. So there are a number of strands of work underway in relation to improving those experiences. Of course, local authorities, you know, and I know many do, already have powers to prioritise care experience people's needs in relation to housing. I know these are being used in a different way. I would like to see a little bit more consistency, and that's certainly something that I would be looking to going forward. But I hope that speaks to some of the members' concerns.
So just returning, there seems to be some distinction drawn between the right to request an assessment and the right to actually receive the support. Why is the bill making that distinction between those two? Why not just say it's a right to receive rather than a right to request an assessment?
I think and I'll bring Gavin in a second, but from my own point of view, and again, we'll probably need to look at the detail on this once this policy's been in place, but you know, I would imagine that if a child or young person who has left care is requesting an assessment, it's very likely that they do have needs, and I would imagine, you know, a local authority will have to step in and provide that support. But if I could perhaps bring Gavin in to speak to the policy in a little more detail.
The position that we reached in the bill is what stakeholders have asked us for, and there's a petition in the Parliament on exactly this issue. And of course, it's about a proportionate response as well, providing support to those who need it, rather than all formerly looked after or young people, to enable we target our resources on those who are going to benefit most from this support.
See, when people say benefit most, that always sounds like a way of limiting the available support. Whereas in North Yorkshire, they say, bluntly, we're always here. Always here. Now, it might be that they don't need a huge amount of support. They might just need a listening ear. But it's straightforward. It's not bureaucratic language around about the right to request an assessment which might possibly lead to a level of support. But we've got limited resources, so it might not be available to everybody. Why not just say we're always here? Just make it plain for people who have a distrust in bureaucracy as it is. So why tie it up? Now, I understand people might be saying that you need to have some assessment to make sure it's going to the right people, but why not just keep it really clear? We're always going to be here for you.
Well, local authorities can progress that if they want to. That's obviously,
you put
North
this-
Yorkshire
why
is not a country. That is, we are delivering legislation for Scotland wide. We provide the powers to local authorities to be able to enhance that further if they wish to do so, which has obviously been a decision that North Yorkshire have taken very admirably. And as I say, I'm more than happy to look into the successes of that. But I'd just like to, draw the parallels there, that we're speaking about legislation on a countrywide basis, as opposed to, a local authority who have taken a decision. Sorry, I'm pointing at my writing down here. A local authority who have taken a decision to enhance that further.
Okay. I am just anxious about that. First of all, what message you're sending. If you're saying it's for those most in need and there's going to be an assessment, it sounds like a filter rather than just saying a right to receive. I am just anxious about that distinction between the two, and it sounds like a budget-saving measure to limit the amount of support. Why not just bluntly say everybody will have the right to receive support, full stop?
As Gavin alluded to, this is what stakeholders have asked for, and I could say in terms of
they've expressed concern to us. I don't know, maybe it's different people, but they've expressed concern.
Okay, well, we'll gather the views and the understanding of where that has came from, and we'll, as I said, I'm more than happy to look into those concerns further.
And thank you for telling me North Yorkshire is not a country.
We've all been enlightened this morning. But just on Willie Rennie's points there, the committee received a response from Clan Child Law that's been published on our website about this. Have you seen that? It's about this bill and this element of the bill.
I believe I have, but
Okay,
Mr
so
Ross
you'll
would
have
have to
seen-
remind me of what's
Yeah,
included
no,
in that.
if you've seen it, this will quickly come into your consciousness. But they say the bill, as currently drafted, does not give the same rights to those who left care before their 16th birthday as those who are aged 16 to 19 who left care after their 16th birthday. They go on to say, in their submission to the committee, the bill gives the lower level of support and protection by way of the restricted rights which are currently available to 19 to 26-year-olds under section 29(2). So that's exactly what Willie Rennie's saying. We're having people coming to us as a committee telling us this. But I think if they're watching this session today, they won't have taken any comfort from your responses.
I mean, I've said I will look into these concerns further. I think it's clear that we are enhancing and improving and widening access to aftercare. So, as I've said, these provisions have been welcomed.
Clan Child Law are saying that the bill gives a lower level of support and protection.
So to that specific group,
Yes.
but as I've said, we are enhancing and widening access to aftercare. So,
But to that specific group is an important group that we should be considering.
but that wouldn't be the case, Mr Ross. As I've said, each child's or young person's needs will be assessed on a case-by-case basis by a local authority.
Sorry, Minister, they've got to ask for that assessment, whereas currently it would be an automatic right. They don't need to go through that, as Willie Rennie's just said. So why are we putting in that hurdle?
Sorry, Mr Ross, you interrupted me there and I've lost my trail of thought. I don't think it's right to generalise and say that a specific group of children will receive a lower level of support, as is the case currently, but as I've said, we are enhancing and extending the right to aftercare. Each child's case will be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and their needs will be supported in the appropriate way by that local authority. So, as I say, I'm happy to have this discussion with Clan Child Law, who are also in my who I will be engaging with in the coming months, and I'm happy to have these discussions with them.
Do you think they're right with what they're telling us here?
I don't think it's right to generalise. I think I've been quite clear in terms of saying that
But they are right to highlight this as an issue of concern.
Yeah, and as I've said, I will look into these concerns further ahead of stage 2. If there's ways, if there are legitimate
there's a very simple
ways.
amendment, to put. There's not. You don't think?
No, you're simplifying something that is very complex. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just saying that I don't believe that it's quite as simple as saying, OK, we'll just make an amendment. I have to discuss these concerns further. And as I say, that's something that I have committed to looking into further.
Did you and your officials discuss this as an area that the committee might be concerned about before coming here today?
We discussed a number of areas.
This area? I mean, the letter from Clan Child Law only came
Not
in on the
that
4th of
specifically,
November.
no.
I mean, it's a very recent update. Sorry, 3rd of November, 2 days ago. This is very topical. Mr Henderson, were you aware of it? Did you brief the Minister that these are concerns that are coming through from Clan Child Law?
I haven't seen that particular letter from 2 days ago.
So, Minister, you'd seen it, but your official hadn't?
I'm sorry, Mr Ross, I must be thinking of another letter or another response from Clan Child Law.
Okay.
I didn't realise that was from 2 days ago.
Okay. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the Minister and also to your officials who have joined us. I want to ask a question on aftercare and specifically on housing before I move on to another area. The young people that we spoke to about this legislation said that there were some specifics that they felt were missing. So action in certain areas. So this has been described as a framework bill in some ways, but also, you know, they said to us, what about education? What about housing? What about employment, etc.? And so on the question of housing that my colleague Will Rennie started, and I note that the Minister's response about North Yorkshire, I think it was, not being a country, but actually the problem we've got here is that if you don't do something that's quite specific and empowers local authorities to take action, including with the resources backed up to do it, then you're really just washing your hands of any responsibility like this. And the response that I think that you gave doesn't really give us much reassurance that the government are prepared to take the action necessary to support local government to do the right thing on the Promise Bill. Would that be accurate?
I wouldn't say so, no.
So how then are you going to support local government to take action in areas like housing so that there are tangible differences to young people with care experiences' lives?
Well, I've been very clear. We, are progressing work on the Improving Care Leavers Housing Pathways report. If there are ways to enhance our support to local authorities in relation to, housing, but other aspects too, then I'm certainly happy to consider those further. As I've said, local authorities already do hold the power to provide support to care experienced people in relation specifically to housing. And as I've said, as I would say about a number of aspects relating to the promise, I think that we have to remember that, especially in relation to people with care experience, I would say ensuring that they have adequate access to housing is a preventative measure. It will help local authorities to prioritise that from an early point. So I think as much as the Scottish Government can work to support local authorities, and we will, and we continue to do so, I think there is a role for local authorities in terms of supporting themselves and thinking ahead and taking those preventative measures that will help to save in ways later down the line. And I would put housing in that category.
And as would I think prevention is always more appropriate than cure, I think is the comment. But having a power to do something and having the resources and capacity to deliver on that power are two different things. Is the Minister confident that local authorities will have the resources and the capacity to deliver the power that she's hoping to give them?
I am confident, yes.
Through budget process, has the Minister raised these issues through the budget process and the settlement for local government?
So I've, I raise a number of issues, or I discuss a number of aspects of my whole portfolio in relation to the budget. That's, the finances for this bill are certainly something that is included in that. I couldn't speak specifically to, obviously, the budget proposals, though.
Okay, and I know that other members are going to touch on finances, so I'll leave that specific thread there. You spoke about a pathway for care leavers to housing. Is that something you'd consider putting on a statutory footing?
I think it's best to leave it to local authorities who are best placed to make the decisions for their own areas. As I've said, I know that many local authorities already do proactively take that approach in terms of prioritising housing for care leavers. I think I said in my response to Mr Rennie that I appreciate there's inconsistency there, and that's, again, something that I will be raising with the Cabinet Secretary for Housing, something I will be discussing with her.
But young people told us that, and I think the Minister must acknowledge that if it isn't a statutory responsibility, local authorities are really struggling to do anything in the margins out with that. So is that something that she thinks this bill will change?
Prioritising housing for care leavers doesn't necessarily have a cost attached to it. In fact, I would imagine that it would actually have savings in terms of if that doesn't happen, there's a breakdown in that person's situation, the services that they would come into contact with. So I don't know if that's an appropriate stance to take.
Okay. I mean, I won't claim to tell you what you think is appropriate for your view on it. I'm just concerned that something tangible for care leavers is really important, and it's already been suggested that another bill will be needed as a result because this bill excludes so much. What's the Minister's response to that?
I think I've said to most of the committee members when I've met them, I don't know if another bill was necessary. That will be for a future Parliament to decide. There could definitely be other aspects of legislation that could be progressed in relation to different aspects or different areas. I think that kind of goes along with the package that is the work that is prioritised to deliver the promise. We've been very clear. We have legislative needs. We also have the other package of work that's going on around progressing on the legislative side, and if a future Parliament deems that there are areas that will need further legislation, then, I don't think I can necessarily comment on that. What I can say is that I know that the provisions in this bill are welcomed by many and will make a difference, and have been stated to make a difference in the lives of children and young people with care experience.
And I don't doubt that people have welcomed them, but we have also heard significant evidence about what's not there. But on that, what isn't there, is the commitment to the UNCRC in some areas. So a number of stakeholders have said that the drafting of sections 1 and 2 specifically on aftercare and section 10 on the register of foster carers, for example, amend the Children's Scotland Act 1995. And so because that's pre-devolution UK legislation, it's out with the scope of the UNCRC 2024. What's the Minister's view on whether the bill needs to be amended to bring the affected sections within scope of the 24 Act?
So obviously I understand the implications for adding provisions by making amendments to UK Acts in devolved areas. And, as the Member States, we've tried, or not specifically, but we have tried to avoid doing that as much as possible in the bill, and the member has stated the two areas that has not been possible. To be very clear, this has been brought to me by a range of members and a range of stakeholders. I have listened to and heard the concerns that have been raised, and I am still taking advice on this issue. I would be clear that the way the bill is drafted at the moment, while those are the two areas that don't fall in compatibility with UNCRC, both are being drafted in a way that is compatible with UNCRC. And, for example, the register for foster carers would be fully drafted in scope with UNCRC, or fully produced, I should say. But please be assured that, as I say, I've heard the calls of concern around this area, and I am still considering advice on this going forward.
And so time, you don't have much time on this, and it's the sort of thing I think stakeholders and people with lived experience or care experience would have probably thought the government would have done in advance of this, given that the government, of course, made a lot of the UNCRC. So what specific drafting routes are you looking at to bring it into scope?
So I would probably need to bring Barry in to speak to that directly.
Yeah. Well, obviously we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. Obviously there's wider work through the Children's Rights Scheme it's in draft at the moment to explore the wider issue about the scope of the compatibility duty to UK enactments. And so that there's wider work on that. But I think we've always been clear that that in terms of making sure that legislation is clear and workable, that you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis when you've got already pre-existing provisions, such as the Children's Scotland Act 1995, and Part 2 of that in particular has a whole integrated sets of rights to do with children who need care and protection from local authority. So children who are looked after, there's rights and obligations built hardwired into the 1995 Act, and other rights alongside that, like continuing care. So I suppose the question for, if you took aftercare, for example, that if you started to take that out of the Part 2 of the 1995 Act, you'd still be left with integrated rights associated with that wouldn't fall within the scope of the compatibility duty, and so that you would end up with something that's even more unclear and unworkable. So there's a question about aftercare on the register of foster care provisions. Well, the register of foster care provisions do not affect the underlying provisions and duties that local authorities have in relation to foster care placements, etc. And again, those are hardwired into the Part 2 of the 1995 Act. So our judgment at this stage is that trying to draft to reenact provisions out with the scope of the 1995 Act wouldn't solve the underlying issue that you'd have provisions that don't connect, no longer connect with the 1995 Act in a coherent and workable way.
Me though, Mr McCaffrey, is that not why we have new legislation since 1995? So that was a long time ago, and if that bill was tight enough in terms of children's rights, we wouldn't necessarily have needed parts of the UNCRC, but we do, and we have a new bill, so surely there's an opportunity to write that bill. And I know that you've said we're not starting from scratch, but this is a new bill. You could write something onto the face of it about the UNCRC in those particular areas.
Yeah, but I mean, as I say, when you're looking at making new law, your first point is, how does your law connect with the existing statutory framework? And aftercare and foster care, they are integrated rights that are hardwired into Part 2 of the 1995 Act. So if you tinker about and try to redraft as freestanding provisions, then it doesn't necessarily solve the problem of UNCRC Act compatibility, because you can't disconnect from the other rights that are still hardwired into the Act.
Could you not just write the gaps in? If there's gaps in the 95 Act, which presumably there are, could you not just write those ones into this piece of legislation?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by gaps per se, but as I say, there's a whole integrated sets of rights and responsibilities in Part 2 of the Children's Scotland Act 1995. And so when you're looking at particular rights within that framework, such as aftercare or foster care, it's very difficult when you don't have a blank sheet to arrive at a solution that ensures that the legislation continues to be clear and workable and fully joined up.
So are you arguing, therefore, that the 95 Act gives exactly the same rights as the UNCRC, so there's no point in adding anything to the bill? Well,
we're obviously satisfied that the Children's Scotland Act as a whole should be capable of operating in a manner that's compliant with all relevant rights, whether that's ECHR or UNCRC. But the problem that we face when we're making new law about something that's already on the statute book is how do you do that in a coherent and workable way? So we've been looking at that and looking at how aftercare and foster care provisions sit alongside a whole framework of other rights that are built into the 1995 Act. Okay. So you don't necessarily solve the compatibility problem if you just start tinkering about with particular aspects of that, and indeed you might end up something that's even less clear and unworkable.
So forgive me then, Minister, I'm slightly confused, because what appears to be being said is that we can't bring any further legislation that would give further rights according to the UNCRC because we can't tinker with any previous legislation. Have I misunderstood? Is that your understanding?
No, I think it would lead to duplication and it would lead to unnecessary complexity. However, as I've said, I hear the concerns that have been raised. I'm committed to UNCRC, and if I find, or if I'm getting advice on this, and if I find that there is a way forward that would combat that, then I will be doing so.
Okay, so specifically then on assessments that support decisions for all under 16 care leavers, which we've discussed a while ago, will they be justiciable against UNCRC standards of participation, best interest and non-discrimination?
Yes.
How?
Because they would be in line with, as we've already mentioned, the provisions that are already there under UNCRC, under GIRFEC. So, local authorities already have responsibility.
But, sorry, Minister, they don't, because the bit that this legislation refers to is out with the scope of the UNCRC. So they don't
Out
already
with
have
the scope
responsibility.
in terms of challenging, but
That
not
was my
out.
question. My question was about judiciability.
Okay, sorry
That's okay.
if I misheard your question. So sorry, because I've went on a different strand. Could you?
So my question was, will they be justiciable against the UNCRC standards of participation, best interest and non-discrimination?
Oh, sorry. So at the moment, those two provisions, I believe not. I would have to look to Barry to confirm that. That's why I've said that, I understand the concerns around this and we'll be looking into it further.
Just to clarify, per se, the fact that they are not by being within a UK enactment, they are not within the scope of the compatibility duty, so far as that might give rise to judicial remedies under the UNCRC Act. But that it is the case that alongside that, the Children's Rights Scheme is looking to enhance the rights of children. And it isn't just a question of looking at judicial remedies, it's other ways that children can have their rights enhanced when local authorities are making decisions about them. So there is wider work about remedies, whether that's judicial or otherwise, to ensure that children can assert their rights in a way that's UNCRC compatible.
And nobody wants to have to go to court to do this. I'm not suggesting that. But ultimately, there's no point in having rights if you can't uphold them. So would the answer then be just to apply, to draft in at stage 2, amendments on participation, best interest and non-discrimination duties?
That's exactly what I'm receiving advice about. So Ms Duncan Glancy knows that I'm more than happy to discuss the different aspects of the bill, but this specifically. So I'm more than happy to continue conversations around this once I have received more full advice in relation to amendments for stage 2.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question, Convener. Young people said that someone, and I'm quoting from the transcript, that someone, a person or department, needs to be culpable if not delivered. So can I ask, who does the Minister think that is?
So I think there is an issue here in terms of there is responsibility across a number of fronts to deliver on the promise. Of course, I am the Minister for the promise, so I lead from the front in that respect. But we have a whole government effort, we have local government effort, we have, third sector partners who are working on a daily basis to deliver the promise. I find it would be hard to put one person make one person accountable for that entire journey, remembering, of course, the time that's involved in this. However, I've been very clear. I do think there is room for more accountability. I think, there's already ways that we are looking to understand the level of delivery of the promise across Scotland. We obviously have, we have aims and targets in relation to what we want to see, and I've already mentioned inconsistency that we do see across Scotland in relation to different aspects or different areas of delivery of the promise. So I think there is further work that could be done in this regard. I don't necessarily think I can put on record at committee right now who I think should be seen to be accountable for this, because I think as I said, there are a lot of delivery partners across Scotland. But I think that there are certainly ways that we could look to to increase accountability.
Someone has to take leadership for it, though.
Well, I take leadership for it at the moment, but obviously, there were decisions made prior to my time in the ministerial role, and there will be more decisions made following my time in this ministerial role. At the moment, I absolutely take responsibility. I lead from the front as the Scottish Government Minister. But I don't know if we can, at the end of the day, put one person accountable for delivery of the promise, given the various different efforts and the various different people that have been involved. However, I do think there's room for further accountability, not just from a local authority perspective, but from all of our delivery partners, agencies, organisations who are involved in the promise.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Mr McCaffrey, Pam Duncan-Glancy asked the Minister a very clear question, which we originally got a very clear answer that was 100% incorrect. As the senior legal representative on the panel today, at which point did you realise the Minister was wrong, and why didn't you interject?
Sorry, I'm not clear in what respect.
Okay, well, I'll go. It was only a few minutes ago. Pam Duncan-Glancy asked very clearly if elements could be judicially reviewed under UNCRC that were out with the scope of the UNCRC. The Minister gave a one-word answer, yes, they could, followed it up, sorry, the Minister did, followed it up, and then had to ask for the question to be repeated. And when the question was repeated, changed her answer.
I'm sorry, Mr Ross, I would need to look at the official record, but I don't believe I did say yes in a one-word answer to Ms Duncan-Glancy, because
you said
I
yes.
misunderstood her question.
I know. You said yes, and then when Pam Duncan-Glancy asked how that could happen, you then started to give an answer. And then when you asked for the question to be repeated, you said, actually, Pam Duncan-Glancy was correct, it couldn't be. I'm just wondering why the senior lawyer on the panel didn't pick up on that.
Well, I didn't understand that was what the Minister was saying in that respect. And I did make an intervention because I did discuss.
Because the Minister asked you to come back in again when they got clarification. But if you didn't hear that and you didn't pick up on that, fine.
No, but I did make the point that beyond judicial remedies there are scope for. So I was picking up the point that those specific provisions being within the 1995 Act would not fall within the UNCRC compatibility duty.
Yeah.
So
which was completely different to what the Minister had just said. But corrected herself. I just wondered why no one else on the panel had sought to correct that. Because had Pam Duncan-Glancy not challenged it, that would have been the information we had on the record. We can go away and look at it again if we want. On this point, Minister, sorry, and I go back to where I started this morning. This has been a major issue with written submissions, oral evidence. I understand I'm not allowed to say, what was said to us in our private session, but we had your officials on their own with us, and this was raised with them right at the very beginning. How are we coming to write a report on this bill, and you're still seeking advice on it?
It's an extremely complex matter, and I need to seek legal advice on it.
But how do we then write a report on this issue? If the Minister is always the last person giving evidence, because they are supposed to provide us with the answers to the queries that have come through. This has been a consistent theme throughout our evidence, and at the moment, when we are writing our report, we still have a big question mark over where you as the Minister and the Government are on compatibility with UNCRC.
Well, I don't want to tell you how to write your report, Mr Ross, but
what
I would say is that we've been very clear that we have tried to draft the bill in line with UNCRC and the provisions in line with UNCRC as much as possible. There have been two areas where there are complexities which have already been gone through by officials. Despite these two areas not falling in compatibility with UNCRC, there are still safeguards and protection in place for children in relation to these areas, and those aspects of the bill are still being produced in line with UNCRC. I have said that I am taking the concerns clearly, and I'm looking to further advice. So I appreciate that's not a final point for the committee report, but I've been very clear that I'm open to moving on this further if that is what the legal advice tells me that I can do.
So Mr Henderson or Mr McCaffrey, what advice could still go to the Minister that hasn't gone to her in the last few months while we've been raising this at committee?
Well, forgive me, I'm not going to be drawn on what legal advice may be sought or given in relation to a
have
bill.
you withheld anything to this point, or have you provided the Minister with everything?
Well, what I've been trying to say in my evidence a short time ago was just trying to explain the complexity of taking things out from an existing legal framework.
But that was an explanation of we're not going to change it.
No, I wasn't saying that at all.
Okay.
But I was trying to explain, because you're looking for evidence on the bill's provisions as they stand, so that you can understand why the government has taken a position in relation to those two specific provisions in the bill, and why our judgment has been on the basis of the consideration to date.
But at the moment, your legal advice then would be that there is no requirement for amendments and it should stay as it is.
Well, it's not a question of my legal advice or not, and I'm not going to be drawn into what legal advice I may or may not be giving in the context of the bill. But
you are not suggesting changes at the moment.
Well, as I say, it's not for me to make suggestions about changes or not, but I can try to explain as I've tried to do.
Are you providing further advice on this point to the Minister?
Well, as I say, the Minister is looking at a number of areas.
Yeah, but looking at what we already know, or are you preparing more information to go to the Minister?
Well, I'm not going to be drawn into specific legal advice.
Minister, what discussion have you had with other departments, ministers and cabinet secretaries about this?
I have requested further information on this, so I would assume that that will be coming.
Okay, so my question was about other cabinet secretaries, ministers and departments.
I haven't discussed this specific aspect
Okay,
with other cabinet secretaries. I'm seeking legal advice.
Okay, but this is an issue that came up in our evidence session, that this is not a unique bill, that, for example, the housing bill, the exact same issues were raised by stakeholders and amendments were drafted at stage 2. It seems to me there's an issue within the government about this. So when you heard that in evidence that this problem was almost identical in the housing bill, did you not go to the housing minister, or did your officials go to officials in those departments and say, how do we resolve this? So first of all, did you ask the housing minister about it?
I did not ask the housing minister specifically about it.
Even when you saw that being raised in our evidence?
No, but I know my officials have done that in the background, and if you would allow me to bring Gavin in, then he can speak to
Henderson.
So, well, I think as Mr McCaffrey set out, the position that we had reached at introduction is as set out in the bill. Clearly there has been some challenge to that in relation to these two areas. On the back of that, there have been a number of discussions within government across departments, including with officials supporting other cabinet secretaries and wider interests, including constitutional interests, for example, about what advice we will put for Ms Dawn Innes and other ministers about the approach we take here. And that's the stage we're at.
So why didn't you do that before introduction? Because the housing bill was well ahead of this bill and these concerns had already been highlighted.
So
is there no discussion within government that we keep having problems at stage 2 with compatibility with UNCRC?
The government is looking to tackle this from a wider perspective. You know, we are looking to progress engagement with the UK government to explore the removal of legislative restrictions that currently limit our ability to enhance, protections or human rights protections across areas devolved to Scotland. However, if that engagement doesn't prove successful, by November 2026, the government will be looking for a more straightforward and effective route to extending protection for children's rights by commissioning a review of the provisions in the Acts of Parliament of the UK in devolved areas to identify key provisions that interact with children's rights. So I think...
So in a year's time?
No, because as I said clearly at the beginning, we are looking to further engage with the UK government around this. That's not specifically for my portfolio responsibility. I'm more than happy to provide the committee with an update around that. But I think that gets back to the problem Mr Ross highlights. Yes, we are having problems based on the fact that the decision was taken to limit the Scottish Government's ability to enact the UNCRC to its fullest. So we do continue to have problems. I appreciate that these are, in different areas. And I think it's very clear that there is a government approach in terms of combating this on a whole. At the moment, we are having to take that more piecemeal approach in terms of the different portfolio areas. And I've been very clear with the committee. I've heard the concerns. I am awaiting further legal advice to see what would be best going ahead for stage 2.
This isn't about an issue of conflict with the UK government. This is because part of this bill, sections 1 and 2 and section 10, amend the Children's Scotland Act 1995. So you were saying that maybe the UK government could write off some of the legislation?
No, I'm not saying that in relation to this specific bill.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Your answer there seemed to be more general about UNCRC, not about this bill. This bill could be sorted with amendments at stage 2 without any further involvement from the UK government.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I was giving the committee an idea of the general response to UNCRC and highlighting the issues around that. I've already been very clear in my answers about what I'm doing in relation to the concerns that have been raised in relation to the specific aspects of this bill.
And you'll provide the committee with more information about that cross-department work?
I mean, I'm happy to do so, and I'll continue. I think every party spokesperson that I've met with raised this issue with me, so I'm more
because
than
it's
happy
come up
to.
so much in our evidence, which is why certainly I hope we'd be further on today in terms of our deliberations. Do you understand that frustration?
I absolutely understand that, and as I say, I'm awaiting further legal advice, and I can only apologise that we don't have a fuller sort of position for the committee.
Okay. George Adam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and everyone else. Paul McClelland brought up the main issue in his usual very quiet and very dignified way. He brought up the fact that the children and young people are the most important people with regards to this bill. And we've been told by various people that this bill will be a starting point for it, and also it's not the main delivery mechanism, because a lot of the work that's done is actually done by local authorities and other kind of areas. So do you believe the way the bill is just now, and working in partnership with other authorities and organisations to deliver the promise, do you believe that this bill will be that starting point, that jumping off point to make sure we deliver that?
Absolutely. In fact, I would just slightly disagree with Mr Adam. I don't believe this is a starting point at all. I believe this is a midpoint. I've been very clear that, you know, we're in 2025, we're halfway towards delivery of the promise. And I feel there has already been, you know, a host of work ongoing that has already made significant improvements to the lives of children and young people. And we hear that, you know, on a daily basis. I do believe, in terms of legislation, that this will have extremely positive impacts in relation to a number of the provisions in it. And as I've already been clear, I think there will obviously be further areas of consideration down the line. But this, I believe this bill speaks to a lot of the issues that have been raised, both with myself and both, you know, with the government through the years in relation to, you know, experiences of children and young people with care experience.
Some of the examples we've been given is coming from a pretty chaotic background myself, family-wise. I never had this type of support, but in a family that's deemed a normal upbringing, you've always got mum and dad to go to. And the whole part of this bill is to kind of use organisations and ourselves to put that arm round the person that's going through all that difficulty and say, we're here for you, we're going to support you. And it backs up some of what Willie Rennie was saying about North Yorkshire's kind of idea of kind of simplifying the idea of doing that. So already there are local authorities that are doing, you and I will know that, similar backgrounds that we have in Renfrewshire Council, where they're actually, when they're doing housing, they're actually taking into account the needs of young people that are going through this process. So it's a case of ensuring that, you know, these local authorities are continuing to do that, because as you quite rightly say, there seems to be, and we get the evidence, there seems to be areas that things are going really well, and there's areas that it's not going as well. And how do we balance that up? But also, how do we encourage areas like our own that have been doing various kind of social housing prospects where they're including housing for young people in these situations and amongst everyone else, but the support is there for them as well, which is the important thing.
Yeah.
Not just finding a set of keys and saying, there you go, pay your rent and do your thing, get on with it.
Yeah, it's about that wraparound support and really providing, you know, holistic, person-centred approaches to the needs of children and young people, and I know that some local authorities are doing that very well. And actually, this is not about calling out any specific local authority. I think some local authorities are excelling in some areas and some are excelling in other areas. And actually, I think Mr Adam hits the nail on the head there in terms of it's about sharing best practice. I think sometimes local authorities, and rightly so, given the pressures that they're under, think that, you know, if there's policy changes or, you know, thinking about different ways of doing things, that can be extremely complex. And yet sometimes just and I know this because I've been in the room when it's happened, I know sometimes just sharing that information and sharing abilities and different ways of doing things can have huge benefits. So I think that we're sort of talking about inconsistency here, and I guess kind of coming back to how we sort of measure and track the progress that's going on and really understand and hone in on the areas where we do need to see improvements. And equally, I think there has to be a level of responsibility there. There needs to not be a case of, you know, I don't want anyone to get offended if the government does approach and look to support to enhance specific aspects, because I think, you know, we all want to do better, we all want to make improvements. So, you know, taking responsibility and thinking, yeah, we can do better is really, really important. But sorry, I went off track there. In relation to understanding what is going on across the country, obviously we have the promised stories of progress, we have work ongoing to understand and gather more data around what is happening. I think that provides currently provides and will provide a clearer view and understanding of what is happening, and will allow us then to proactively, you know, approach areas where we think that support could be enhanced or things could be improved. So there was a lot in there. I hope that speaks to the questions that you've asked.
The other thing, it brings me on to another thing that both of us with our local government backgrounds is corporate parenting was obviously mentioned quite a lot when you're a local councillor. I don't think if you're out with a local authority it's maybe looked upon as an important thing, but I believe it's quite important issue when you're trying to look at how do we, a lot of people don't like the language, corporate parenting, but how we actually deal with it as an authority, or local authorities deal with it. Now, we were told that some evidence that some people are very positive about this idea. They see it as a form of support and help, but others see it as a piece of state intervention. Now, how do you feel about that, and how do we actually kind of make sure that we pitch it as it's an idea here to help someone?
So I think, I've heard about the concerns in relation to corporate parenting. Again, that's something that I'm wanting to delve into a little further. But, you know, I believe, and I get the sense Mr Adam does too, that, you know, corporate parenting, it really lies at the heart of Scotland's commitment to care experienced children. I think the extension to corporate parenting duties offer really a strengthened lens through which public bodies can, with obviously an understanding of the experience and the potential needs of children, can continue to provide really the best trauma-informed, the best rights-respecting support for them and their families to ensure they thrive. What I would say to some of the concerns, you know, legislation is very clear that corporate parents can only act in ways consistent with the proper exercise of their other public functions, so within legal and budgetary competence and authority. The provisions do not, for example, mandate like compulsory reviews for non-looked after children or force care experienced children to share their status. So again, I heard some of the concerns around this come up at committee. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly where they came from, but this is something that I plan to be discussing going forward in an effort to alleviate some of those concerns, because, as I say, I hold the importance of corporate parenting very high, and see that as, you know, really lying at the heart of our commitment to care experienced children.
Okay, thank you.
That's you, Mr Adam?
That is me.
That is. Okay, I'm just checking because I think that's probably a good point to take a break, and I will suspend the meeting for 15 minutes.